We did not have to wait that long. Mitch Johnson is officially the Spurs' new head coach.
You are Locked On Spurs, your daily San Antonio Spurs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, welcome back again on a Friday afternoon right here on Locked On Spurs. I'm your host, Jeff Garcia, Spurs writer for Kens 5 San Antonio. And yeah, another episode right here on Locked On Spurs today because so much has been going on today. You already know what's going on with Popovich. He's officially moving away from the sidelines and moving to his new role, well, just role as team president, but full-time purposes, right? So we know with Popovich what he's going to be doing moving forward, but that left an empty seat, the head coaching spot. There's wild speculation. Who's going to be Becky Hammond, Taylor Jenkins, Mike Malone? Pick a player. A person out there, Mike Brown, sure, that the Spurs were going to go after them, but within seconds, moments after Popovich announced his movement away from the sidelines, the Spurs already, well, they sealed that up. Mitch Johnson, yes, he's no longer the interim head coach. He is now the Spurs' full-time new head coach. Yeah, so we're going to be discussing that. What does it mean moving forward? Fan reaction, and did Mitch earn it? Well, let's talk about that and more. It's going to bring in our guest on this special episode of Locked On Spurs. He is back, everybody. Matt Guzman. What's going on, Matt? Busy day today, huh?
Absolutely. I can't say I was expecting the news today, but I guess it's been any day. So
I'm right there with you because I was expecting like a heavy day about trade speculation, Giannis or KD or so. I was prepared for that. And then boom, we have the news about Popovich moving away from head coaching job to team president. By the way, everybody, just before we get Matt's 2 cents on it, if you want to hear a full react to Popovich moving away from head coaching, we just released a Locked On Spurs before this one. It is there, full details. So what's going on, statements from the Spurs and Popovich himself. And by the way, Matt, I think everybody should know that with Popovich as team president, it's nothing new. He's always been that. He's just going to be doing that full time. But let's get your reaction to the news about Pop, calling it a career on the sidelines.
Yeah, well, I think it was something that you and I talked about a couple weeks ago after his latest medical incident. It was just kind of, it almost seemed like it was a foregone conclusion that maybe he wasn't going to come back, and I think it's the right decision. That was my instant reaction. Was I'm glad that, he has the liberty to say, hey, my health matters, and I this was completely his decision, and that's something that very admirable because as much as he would like to be on the sidelines, as much as the fans and the players would love to have him back on the sidelines, I think it's important for him to prioritize his health and make sure that he's going to be okay. And I think it's funny, right? The new role, but it's the same role he's had a lot. His coaching role. That'll allow him to kind of keep his hands in the fire a little bit, but also, take a step back to a slightly less stressful role, I should say. So that was my initial reaction was, I'm glad he's doing this for himself. And I think, nobody's going to blame him or really anything. I think everyone is very pleased with what he's been able to accomplish and very understanding of his decision.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I said in the episode just right before this one, my biggest takeaway was no surprise at all. If you just walked in San Antonio from games to fan interaction to local media, everybody was expecting this. So the big takeaway was, we kind of knew this was going to happen already. All the signs were pointing in that direction. And as I did, we played a little game with you real fast before we get into Mitch Johnson talk here. So in the previous episode, I was trying to struggle like, what more does Pop have to prove? Pick a NBA coaching record. He's probably number one or right up there. So from titles to winning as coach, Team USA gold medal, silver medal, all-star coach of the month, all that good stuff. You go down the list, it's like he's done almost everything. Can you find something he has not done that would have motivated him just as a coach? And the only thing I thought of was just seeing the rebuild through.
Right. Yeah. Finish what started kind of thing. He's been there for those years where, the Spurs were not competitive and have not been competitive. But I think, you talk about a rebuild. He fired the head coach and made himself head coach, 29 seasons ago. And that Spurs team, really needed a boost. And I think he was able to get it from where it was to obviously a dynasty, a five-time champion and 18 straight 50-win seasons. I really don't think there's anything he hasn't done.
Yeah. The only thing I thought of was he never was a head coach, a championship head coach back to back. That's the only thing that he has accomplished. But even if that was on the deck, he likely was not going to see it because the rebuild's still a couple years away. Who knows? Even if he was in perfect health, who knows? But say 78, 79 at that point, would he really be all right? I got to stop already. This is enough. Or, he likely was not going to finish Wemby's pro career, whether it's San Antonio or just seeing it flourish. So, but that was about the only thing I could think of. It's funny too because years ago, Tony Parker spoke with French media, and he said that he's been trying to get Pop to call it a day. He like years ago, he said, "Well, Pop, what are you doing? Still doing this? Like, come on, man." But it was gonna be good to see, and hopefully we get to see it. Crossing fingers is gonna be a picture moment. Him at the Frost, sitting with Timmy, Tony, and Manu watching the game. I mean, I think that would be perfect. And by the way, speaking of perfect, barring any type of surprise, Matt, I think that note that the Spurs sent out. That's it. I don't think there's going to be a press conference because, if Papa's going to, that's probably the way he did it. A little goodbye note. I'm going to be working as team president. Good luck,
Right. Yeah. I mean, the only info I got was something about Mitch Johnson being the new head coach or something like that. That was about it. So I think you're right. I think, and that's something we talked about too. I'm not sure how he'll end up doing a press conference.
And by the way, kudos on the Spurs. They already put out a thank you video for Popovich. So that might be it, fans. Unless they throw a curveball, I can't see Popovich saying, "Yeah, give me a night at the Frost Bank Center where all eyes are on me," because that's never been him. But I think they retire his name. I think his name goes up there, with the code. Yeah, so I think he definitely would be up there. So maybe there'll be that ceremony. So we'll see. Even then, I think he'd be all right. Pull the curtain. We're done. Bye, everybody. Moving on. All right. Well. Yeah. So let's get to the meat of the show here, and that is the next head coach. Now, many were speculating it could be Becky Hammon, Mitch Johnson. Mitch Johnson, Taylor Jenkins, Mike Malone, Stan Van Gundy. The list goes on and on. There's extremely qualified available head coaches, and Mitch Johnson. We've talked about this on Locked On Spurs. You and me and everybody else has come on. That he was likely on the short list, just maybe not at the top. But lo and behold, the Spurs just announced that Mitch Johnson is the guy. They're moving forward with him as the head coach. No longer interim, he is the official head coach. My first big takeaway from this, Matt, is back to what we said about Popovich. I'm not surprised. I am not surprised that they went with Mitch Johnson. They kept it in the family. They kept it with the guy who's been with the organization for a while. I know you're going to hit on that in just a few minutes here. They bring in a guy who's already developed chemistry, some familiarity with the current roster. Why disrupt that? Why, just bring in somebody else who might bring in their own style, maybe bring in their own coaching staff, try to redo everything. Mitch is from that Coach Popovich tree. It just made sense. So again, big takeaway is, not surprised. This is exactly what the Spurs would do. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of people aren't going to be too happy with this decision, I suppose, especially because of how many other names were out there. And, it's also funny to say that because just because they were out there doesn't even mean the Spurs considered them for a second.
Yeah.
For all they know, they've been waiting for Mitch to take the helm since he was named the acting coach way back in November. But, I think this is a very, like you said, very Spurs-esque decision move. They did it 30 minutes after the news was released about Popovich.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be the guy that they look to in the next couple of seasons, at the very least, and like you said, there's no immediate turnover. He's directly from the assistant coaching staff that Popovich assembled.
Yeah.
He's worked with the Spurs for the last 10 seasons, and, he's worked with Victor Wembanyama primarily.
Yep.
When Pop was still the head coach during his rookie year, Mitch Johnson was the guy who was, warming him up and working with him directly one-on-one. That continued as he took on this new role. But, it makes sense. He's been around the team. He's been around this roster, this iteration of the franchise, and he's definitely earned its trust. So it makes sense why they went with him. And I think that that's something that, Spurs fans aren't happy with. They're just going to have to, give it a chance and to see, what can Mitch Johnson do when he has a full offseason, to prepare and to really assume this role and make it his own.
I'm glad you brought up that key phrase there, give it a chance, because technically he did not get a full 100% chance last season. Nobody thought Pop would have that mild stroke, early in the season. And then, oh, by the way, Mitch, fill in now. Like, okay, sure, not a problem. And look, He's going to get a full off season. He already started already. He's going to be able to be in that war room come draft night, be in that war room lottery night, working out guys at the Frost. So many other things he's now going to be heavily involved in when it comes to, the team they assemble and coaching them into a well-oiled machine. He's going to get a full preseason training camp. It'll be his gig, his job. Look, he made it very known last season, Matt, that Popovich was still in his ear. I mean, he's made that very clear. He said Pop even yelled at him a few times for some of the decisions he did. But I'm hoping moving forward that Pop is now hands off. I think Pop was the training wheels last season. You got to take the training wheels off. He's going to have to fly on his own now. And look, we all talked about how Chris Paul mentored Castle last season. I think Popovich mentored Mitch Johnson from afar last season as well. So he had that full year with Popovich helping him as an interim head coach. Obviously, he was the first chair before Pop went out with the stroke. So he learned from there. And let's not forget too, Matt, and I know you want to hammer this home for fans, he's been already on the Spurs, well, at least the coaching radar. It was him that they would send to the Summer League as the head coach. It was him, as you mentioned, that put in charge of player development with Wemby. It was him whenever Popovich got thrown out or was out a game or two, Mitch Johnson would fill in. So all signs were pointing in that direction, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he's been around this team. He knows how it works. He knows the inner workings. He knows Brian Wright. Those two were hired in the same offseason. And so I think, they've been able to grow together, since that 2016 summer or whenever it was. I think he's done enough to earn the role and earn the trust within the Spurs, within the bounds of the Spurs,
Right.
However other people feel about that, that's whatever. But, I think that he's done more than enough to, elicit that chance that they're about to give him this upcoming season, and people cite, his rotations or whatever. But like you said, he was thrown into the fire 5 games into a season, having zero idea that would be what his new reality was going to be. And on top of that, Victor gets a blood clot. De'Aaron Fox undergoes season-ending surgery. Charles Bassey is out for an extended period of time. You have big men depth. And so I think all those things, they made for a pretty tumultuous season for him. And I think, having a full off season to, like you mentioned, even be in the draft room and have input on who he wants to coach next will be huge.
One thing I like too, I'm looking it up right now. He's a young coach. The Spurs needed a younger coach. Obviously, Pop couldn't do it long, but he comes in at, and I got it right here. I think he's 38. He's 38 years old right now. So he definitely is the young coach, the new blood that they needed. And let's not forget, he's been as a coaching role for quite some time, not just with the Spurs, everybody. He actually started his coaching experience in 2015 with you ever heard of this team, the Portland Pilots? Yeah, the Portland Pilots is the men's basketball team in the University of Portland. So, and that was in 2015. Then he went on to the Austin Spurs and then became the Spurs assistant coach, interim, now full-time head coach. And look, technically he's a championship coach. He led the Austin Spurs to the G League title as an assistant coach in 2018. Yeah, so he definitely has earned his stripes and why they give him the nod to take over Popovich's shoes. And those are some pretty big shoes to fill. So why not fill them with somebody who's familiar with the Spurs and Popovich has established? One quick question I got to ask for you, Matt, is we're likely going to see maybe still some young rookie mistakes next season. That's just going to happen because now he's it, and he's probably going to make a few mistakes. But I think Spurs fans got to understand that just comes with the territory. It's going to happen to Castle, even though he's a sophomore. It's probably going to happen to Wemby. These things just need to be ironed out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's going to happen whether you brought in Taylor Jenkins or Mike Malone or whoever, those mistakes happen. There are things that we see that, are questionable. There are things that we are going to have a chance to ask him about, why did you do this? Why'd you do that?
Yeah.
But that, like you said, that comes with the territory. That's what happens as an NBA head coach, and especially one as young as Mitch Johnson. But you have to trust that, if they made this decision, they obviously consulted Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox, and I think these players are really bought into playing for him and then playing, in his system. And I think that's just something that, they're going to get to show next season is what they can do when they have all this time to prepare.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I want to bring out here, Matt, and get your thoughts on this as well, is my biggest fear was if they passed on Mitch, were the Spurs likely going to lose a young up and coming coach, to a Wizards team or a Hornets team or just any team looking for a new blood at that spot? Because we've seen it in the past with Will Hardy, he leaves. Becky Hammond, she leaves. Other young coaches, Ime Udoka leaves. That's a lot of coaching brain drain right there, and good coaching brain drain. Look at Ime, he's doing great right now. Look at Becky, what she's doing in the WNBA. Look at Will Hardy, what they're building in Utah. So that was a big fear. I'm glad he's here because the Wizards definitely tried to poach him from the Spurs a couple seasons ago. So There's that, but he ended up staying in San Antonio. Good for the Spurs moving forward. When you look at the landscape right now, available coaches, no more Mitch, but at the time it was Mitch and Jenkins and Malone and et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, this is a sign, Matt. Get your thoughts on that. The Spurs are, when they say rebuild, they mean rebuild. Instead of bringing an established championship coach like Mike Malone, they go with a not so experienced coach, not NBA championship tested coach, Mitch Johnson. Instead of going with Becky Hammond, who's won multiple WNBA championships and can coach her butt off, they went with Mitch Johnson, the younger and experienced guy. This is a rebuild. And not only are they rebuilding with young guys, Matt, they're rebuilding with a young head coach.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything more Spurs than that. But I think that there's a lot of positives in that. I like that you brought up that he was tried to or the Wizards did try to coach him a couple seasons ago. I don't necessarily know he would have been up for a head coaching job this upcoming season, but if you bring in somebody else with the expectation that they'll be there for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, Mitch Johnson is not staying as an assistant coach throughout that entire time. And so, as long as he's been here, and you have to think that, he's left a positive impact back when he was an assistant coach under Popovich for all these years, even before Victor Wembanyama. You'd like to think that there's a lot that he brings to the table. Yeah. Really hasn't had a chance to show it yet. I can't imagine that he's pulled out I can't imagine he's pulled out close to all the punches that he has when he didn't have the time to get them ready. And so I'm personally, I think, like I told you before we started recording, this is a very Spurs move. And if you're going to be bought into the Spurs as a fan, as a reporter, as anything, you have to accept that that's what it's going to look like. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do this. I think this is just the way they're choosing to do this. And, now we see what happens from here.
Yeah, exactly. And, is there going to be some coaching change? Well, I should say more like play calling changes that we've seen from Popovich next season. Sure. I think that's going to happen. I hope he instills some new things with this young squad. Not the same thing that Popovich is doing wrong. His resume proves me otherwise, but I think it was time for just a new ideas, new thoughts out there. Again, not to say Popovich is closed-minded. He welcomed new ideas, but I just think at that position already, you bring in Mitch Johnson, he's going to do new things. We're going to see it next season. He might be able to start doing it right now for all we know. So, but I like the move, and I know you just go on social media right now. Spurs fans are flipping tables. Well, most, not all, but most Spurs fans are flipping tables. Why you go with Mitch? Jenkins was there. Malone was there. Bring back Becky. You're going to hear that. All right. And guess what? If the Spurs go on a 2-3 game losing streak next year, or maybe more, hopefully they don't, you bet, what Spurs fans are going to go on Mitch. I say it was the wrong coaching move, but you got to give it time. You got to let this young head coach cook. You got to let him, learn on his own now. The training wheels are off. Popovich likely is not going to help him next season. All right. So it's all him now. But again, he's not going to be alone. He's going to have Brett Brown at his side. Who knows who they'll bring in the offseason to replace the position that is now vacant now, assistant coach. Hopefully they bring in a new, an older assistant coach, maybe that can help guide Mitch. You see it in Los Angeles with the young coach like JJ Redick. You see it all over the place. So that's not going to be uncommon. So he'll have a good support system. But man, this job, what a perfect one for him. It's almost a ready-made team, Matt. Wemby, Fox, Castle. Who knows who they'll pick if they keep their picks in the draft. You've got Keldon still, Devin, and Sohan. He's not having to build from scratch. He practically has a ready-made team next season. Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think this team would have gone to the play-in tournament had Victor
Oh,
over
for
in
sure. Yeah.
I think they were on a good course to do that.
Mhm.
But yeah, you mentioned Castle, the fresh off his Rookie of the Year award.
Yep.
He up for a better sophomore season, I hope. Maybe not a sophomore slump, but you put him next to Victor and De'Aaron Fox. You still have Harrison Barnes. There's a lot of opportunity for that roster to spend this offseason growing together and really gelling next year. And if not them, if you make a move, then I'm assuming that it's going to be for a pretty viable star. And at which point you have Victor, whoever that is, and De'Aaron Fox and Stephon Wesley. I think that's like you said, Mitch is definitely not building from scratch. This team has a good foundation around Victor Wembanyama alone. Then you add in the other pieces that they were able to move for this season. And, I think that they have a decent chance at being, in the mix next season. I'm not going to say at the top of the conference, but they have pieces to make them competitive. And I think that they're set to have the best season that they've had since Victor's arrived.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was looking her up right now, Matt. It was, by the way, I was not ignoring Matt. Okay, I'm just playing up something that's pertinent to the conversation right now. Okay, Mitch Johnson did release a statement here. I'm going to pull it up here regarding the Spurs giving him the head coaching gig. He says, "quote I am truly grateful and honored to receive this incredible opportunity. I am thankful for Coach Pop, RC Buford, Brian Wright, and Peter Holt." Or J. Holt, I should say, for trusting me to carry on our culture, and I promise to give responsibility to everything I have to make Spurs fans proud. So right there, Spurs fans, he's thinking about you already. He wants y'all to be proud of this team. There you have it. Those words from Mitch Johnson. I think next week I'll likely talk about the role in a larger scale. So expect that early as next week. But I know Spurs fans. I know most of y'all probably don't like the move. But ultimately, I think it was the right move because you're keeping continuity. You're keeping somebody who's familiar with the roster. You're keeping somebody who the players given a thumbs up to. Chris Paul spoke well about him. Wemby spoke well about him. Think about this. The moment he was given the interim head coach, you would think he would stop doing his player development duties. No, he was still out there with Wemby pregame doing what he had to do with Victor. So it just made sense. And you would have to have been blind to not see this coming. If you're shocked right now, you really shouldn't be. This was going to happen. Just read the tea leaves. Everything was leading this up for Mitch Johnson. Matt, before I let you go, any final thoughts, any final words you want to give the Spurs fans, or just overarching thoughts about the Mitch Johnson taking over as new head coach?
Not much. I mean, I'm personally excited to see what he's able to do with this role and where the Spurs go from here. I was laughing earlier because, you're mentioning the fans not being excited about this move. And I would agree. I don't think a lot of them will be. Mm-hmm. But I have to say, I think Spurs fans are pretty ruthless. I don't know how many times I've seen calls for an interim coach's job during the season. I don't know if it's even possible, but I hope that they can, buy into this new era. Obviously it's going to be tough. Anyone you get is going to be tough to follow out.
Yeah, exactly.
What they felt was in their best interests, and you have to trust that.
Yeah, even if it was Jenkins, even if it was Becky, even if it was Mike Malone, Mike Brown, whoever, those are some big shoes to fill. So, but the good news is that last season he put them on. He slipped on maybe like his toes for a while. Now his full foot's in those shoes. So he understands what needs to be happening in San Antonio. But again, ideal situation, man. 100% healthy, Wemby, 100% healthy. Fox, Castle riding high in his rookie season, rookie of the year. Keldon, Jeremy, you're all coming back, and who knows what happens in the draft? That could be another power player in San Antonio. So once again, congratulations to Mitch Johnson, the San Antonio Spurs' new head coach. Matt, it's been decades since I had to say that. I mean, what 30? Was it 30 plus years he's been with the Spurs, or it was 30 plus years. People in San Antonio never had to say our new head coach for 30 plus years, and here we are. So congratulations to Mitch Johnson, the Spurs' new head coach. Matt, tell us what's going on with Spurs on Sports Illustrated, what you're working on. Why should Spurs fans follow you on X at MattGZMAN?
Well, now I have a big column/feature to write about Gregg Popovich's time here. I was reminiscing about my one time, I guess, my first season I was in the building.
Yeah.
When Pop thought I was comparing Jetty Osman to Paul George when the Clippers were in town.
Oh,
I was just laughing because he shut me up pretty quickly after I asked my question.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm hoping to do something on Pop's impact and just what he's meant to this team, and all the time he's been here.
Yeah. I shared a couple of moments I had with Pop. One one was a fun one, and I think I think he did appreciate it, was because it was during the COVID year where we're still doing the Zoom, and it was that I think it was either way. I definitely know it was when the Spurs first introduced the new alt uniforms, and they had the Fiesta stripes, where it was the black jersey with the 3. Now remember, everybody, Popovich was around when they were first introduced back in the 90s, and so I kind of thought it was full circle. So I asked him, "Hey, what do you think about the colors coming back?" And I remember him, and I'm pretty sure it was a Zoom. I think it was. And he started laughing and just saying, like, "Oh my God," because I remember he started telling the stories about how it came to be, the fan reaction back in the 90s. He was glad to see him coming back. And then where I got zinged was, again, pre-COVID, they used to do Pop's conferences in the hallway of the AT&T, then the SBC Center. And I was late. I think I couldn't get, the elevator was messed up, and ended up getting there a little late, and I was stuck in the back. And we were done. Question was over, and he saw me in the back, and he goes, "You." And he goes, like, what are you here for? What are you doing? He goes, "Are you just here to be our eye candy?" Everybody started laughing, so I thought that was fun. And, I was also there. That funny moment, I was in Brooklyn, New York. It was when it was like weird. The NBA was seeing a bunch of fights happening. And somebody asked him, like, "Oh, what do you think about all this? Like, fights are breaking out and everything?" He started laughing. He goes, What fights? So in the huddle, he demonstrates how guys get a fight nowadays. So he's like, he starts punching in the air and he starts doing this whole rigmarole and dance. He's like, "Oh, everybody hold me back. And I remember I had that on video. So that was hilarious. So definitely a great guy on the sidelines, gave us some great moments, from calling for Shaq to be fouled at tip-off when Shaq was bashing him for doing hack-a-Shaq, to him winking at the crowd when he already get ejected because he knew he was just doing it on purpose, to so many other moments. There's just so many. So please leave your comments about Popovich. What are some of your best moments, favorite moments from the time Popovich was on the sidelines? But again, we're not utilizing him. He's not going anywhere. He's still going to be with the franchise. He's likely going to be there. But as far as the coaching spot is, we'd love to hear what you reminisce about and think about when you think about Popovich as the head coach. But there you have it, Mitch Johnson, the new Spurs head coach. Also, leave us your comments about that as well. What do you think about that? Good move, bad move? Love to hear from you. And as always, we thank y'all for making Locked On Spurs your first listen. Subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcast: iTunes, Spotify, Kinspy, plus YouTube. You guys are the everydayers. And another episode here, Locked On Spurs on a Friday. That's how busy it's been. Matt, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule for coming on here as such a short notice, talk about Mitch Johnson, Spurs' new head coach. So for Matt Guzman, I am Jeff Garcia. We're going to put a lock on this episode of Locked On Spurs.